it rolling, Bob?
Is it rolling, Bob?
Is it rolling, Bob?
Hi out there, everybody, and welcome to Bob Dylan, a head full of ideas. And this is season 3, episode 15, and this is called New Morning, a Pastoral Dream, part 1. This is quite a long text, this one, so I'm kind of dividing it into two bits. New Morning is probably one of Dylan's more underrated albums, and has often been kind of dismissed as being something quite trivial, really. But I'd like to try and counter that. Anyway, we start with a couple of quotes, and the first one is Christopher Marlowe, who's a contemporary of Shakespeare. Come live with me and be my love, and we will all the pleasures prove, that valleys, groves, hills and fields, woods or steepy mountain yields. And we will sit upon the rocks, seeing the shepherds feed their flocks, by shallow rivers to whose falls melodious birds sing madrigals. And that's from a poem called The Passionate Shepherd to His Love. And this is something from Edgar Allan Poe. Take this kiss upon the brow, and in parting from you now, thus much let me avow. You are not wrong who deem that my days have been a dream. Yet if hope has flown away, in a night or in a day, in a vision or in none, is it therefore the less gone? All that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream. And that's Edgar Allan Poe, as you might guess, a dream within a dream. And finally, I close my eyes and then I drift away into the magic night. I softly say a silent prayer like dreamers do. And then I fall asleep to dream my dreams of you. In dreams I walk with you. In dreams I talk to you. In dreams you're mine all of the time. We're together in dreams, in dreams. And those are lines from Roy Orbison's song In Dreams. New Morning is a sequence of short but highly evocative songs that present Dylan's years of rural retreat as existing within a bucolic dream landscape. The beauties and mysteries of nature are celebrated alongside idealised images of love and domestic bliss, conceived as being under the guidance of a benevolent fatherly deity. The album is Dylan's most optimistic and warm-sounding record. In several places it reflects on Dylan's own childhood in the cold North Country, yet there are many hints at the frailty of the personal happiness that's being celebrated. It often seems as if the scenarios we're being introduced to could dissolve at any moment. The question that hangs over the entire album is whether the life Dylan is now leading, or Dylan's narrators are leading, perhaps would be more accurate, will really be enough for him in the future. Will he be able to square the delights of domestic bliss with the demands of being a poet who's been inspired by figures like Rimbaud, Whitman, Blake and Ginsberg, who are determined to live a poet's life in which the writer opens himself up to all experience, no matter how traumatic. New Morning continues Dylan's efforts, which have dominated much of his work since the Basement tapes, to use relatively simple, stripped-down language. It's perhaps Dylan's most melodic collection, leading us through a series of reflective moods with distinctive, hummable tunes. Most of the tracks contain the prominent choruses and bridge sections favoured by pop songwriters, and a number of them have inspired distinctive cover versions. In his wonderful so-called autobiography, Chronicles Volume 1, Dylan devotes a whole chapter to the recording of the album. Now, according to this account, some of the songs were originally written to accompany Scratch, a play by the noted American playwright Archibald MacLeish. But Dylan pulled out of the project as he felt that the themes of the play were really too dark for the relatively upbeat material he was producing. So perhaps at this time Dylan's trying to write something dark, but he can't because he doesn't feel dark. He feels kind of happy, which is quite a strange state for a poet to be in, perhaps, you might argue. The album was mostly recorded in New York studios and, despite its rural setting, moves away from the country-dominated Nashville sound of recent albums towards pop, jazz and blues stylings. Dylan's voice, while still fairly mellow in tone, returns to a rather more nasal sound, giving his vocals a little more edge and adding to the ambiguity of the material. The initial sessions for the album featured George Harrison on guitar, with Charlie Daniels on bass and Russ Kunkel on drums, but these recordings weren't used. An original Dylan composition, Working on a Guru, featuring jokey throwaway lyrics, which were possibly intended to make fun of spiritual seeker Harrison, was recorded, along with a number of cover versions such as Paul McCartney's Yesterday, the Everly Brothers' All I Have to Do Is Dream, Sam Cooke's Cupid, and a medley of Phil Spector hits, Da Do Ron Ron and so on. It's hard to believe that Dylan was seriously thinking of recording Da Do Ron Ron. But he did record an album of Christmas songs, so anything's possible. In later sessions, Dylan added Al Kooper, who had famously supplied the crucial organ riff on Like a Rolling Stone on keyboards and guitar, and David Bromberg, who Dylan would later record several sessions with, on guitar and dobro. Dylan plays piano on 7 of the tracks, and his distinctly choppy style is particularly evident throughout. The album also marks his first use of a trio of female backing singers, various permutations of which would be a feature of his live shows all the way from 1978 to 1987. On certain tracks, Cooper, who had accumulated much experience as a record producer and arranger since 1966, pushed Dylan to experiment with elaborate string and brass arrangements, as revealed in the outtakes featured on the bootleg series Another Self-Portrait, the 1973 Blackmail release, so-called, Dylan and the Copyright Extension Set 1970. If you don't know about the Blackmail album, this was released by CBS at the time when Dylan had actually switched to Asylum Records, I guess the idea was that unless Dylan went back to CBS, they had a lot of material that he didn't particularly want releasing that they could bring out. The Dylan album, it's kind of hard to get now, and it consists of outtakes mainly from New Morning, but really most of it material that Dylan was unlikely to ever release, although the version of Can't Help Falling in Love, the famous Elvis song, is pretty memorable, really. But in the end, anyway, Dylan settled on a more basic live sound for most of the tracks on New Morning, with producer Bob Johnston adopting his usual hands-off approach. As a result, the music sounds spontaneous, and the positivity in the songs is very life-affirming at times. The songs of New Morning appear to be taking place in some kind of idealised pastoral Arcadia. The Pastoral was a prominent feature of classical literature. The ancient Greek poet Hesiod's Works and Days is set in a pastoral golden age when humans lived in perfect harmony with nature, as is Theocritus's Idyls. The works of Roman poets such as Virgil in his Eclogues, Horace in his Epodes, and Ovid in his Metamorphoses all contain strong pastoral elements. The biblical Garden of Eden is another idealised pastoral location. With the coming of the Renaissance, pastoral poetry became fashionable once again through the works of Petrarch, Sidney and Spenser. In Shakespeare's As You Like It, the protagonists escape to the Forest of Arden to get away from such pressures. The Romantic poets, with their focus on the beauties and sacredness of nature, adopted a number of pastoral tropes in works such as Wordsworth and Coleridge's lyrical ballads and Blake's Songs of Innocence. Many of these poems were, like Dylan's early songs, written in traditional ballad form. They are in fact songs, aren't they? Blake makes that obvious, Songs of Innocence. William Blake himself used to sing these songs. Unfortunately, there wasn't any recording technology in those days. Otherwise, we might have William Blake albums, William Blake bootlegs, and so on. Sadly, no. I wonder what kind of singer he was. Anyway, many of these poems were, like Dylan's early songs, written in traditional ballad form. In many pastoral works, the idealised rural locations are presented as an escape from and a contrast to the complications and power struggles of urban life. By the late 1960s, the Back to Nature movement within alternative culture became prominent, making the pastoral a key feature of that culture. Dylan and the band's rural retreat in Woodstock was soon to be imitated by many rock bands such as Traffic, Fairport Convention and Led Zeppelin, who were reported to be getting it together in the country. Such retreats were often positioned as reactions to the excesses and temptations of urban life, with particular reference to excessive drug taking and sexual profligacy. New Morning is one of Dylan's most autobiographical works, in that the songs mirror his own retreat from the spotlight of endless tours and promotions. But like the pastoral poets, he imagines himself in a dreamlike state of nature, which is linked to a kind of spiritual reawakening and a deep enjoyment of simple natural pleasures. His songs of experience behind him, he presents his own songs of innocence. But there's always a hint that the songs of experience will one day return. Despite the sheer happiness that is conveyed in many of these short melodic pieces, there's a sense that the singer may soon wake up from this dream. Time Passes Slowly illustrates these themes with great clarity. The recording's dominated by the interplay between Dylan's staccato piano runs and snatches of lyrical guitar. The jumpy and unpredictable piano lends an air of uncertainty to the song, which contrasts against the apparently passive tone of the lyrics. Despite the dreamy nature of the composition, Dylan's vocal expression tends towards the harsh tones of his pre-1967 work, presenting an illuminating disparity between what's being described and the manner the description is being presented. The song begins by instantly placing us within the Arcadian reverie. Time passes slowly up here in the mountains. We sit beside bridges and walk beside fountains. Catch the wild fishes that float through the stream. Time passes slowly when you're lost in a dream. Dylan's often been quoted as saying that his ambition in writing his songs is to stop time. Here, time has not so much stopped as slowed down, like a silent film being projected at the wrong speed. As in Blake's Songs of Innocence, the imagery is clear, direct and generalised. Mountains, bridges, streams, fishes. The fishes are not swimming but floating, an image of effortless, of nature carrying along the narrator, like those fishes, by the currents. But already it is clear that this is all a dream in which the narrator is lost. The next line begins, "Once I had a sweetheart that was fine and good looking," which combines the name of a traditional English folk song, once recorded by Pentangle on their 1969 album Basket of Light, that's Once I Had a Sweetheart, with a nod to Hank Williams' country classic Hey Good Looking. Dylan paints a cosy little picture. "We sat in the kitchen while her mama was cooking," which uses Williams' jokey looking cooking rhyme. The feeling of dreaminess is never far away. The lovers are depicted in the style of a typical romantic song as staring up at the stars in wonder before we hear that time passes slowly when you're searching for love. In the bridge section which follows, Dylan repeats "Ain't no reason" 4 times, indicating that the narrator does not need to go in a wagon to town, to the fair, or indeed anywhere. The narrator clearly wants to stay within his idyllic dream world. Any untoward movements will apparently break the spell. By the final verse, there is a sense that the narrator and his lover are struggling to maintain their apparent state of perfect happiness. Time passes slowly up here in the daylight. We stare straight ahead and try hard to stay right. Time may be passing slowly, but it's obvious that the darkness of night will eventually come. Dylan then presents us one final resonant image. Like the red rose of summer that blooms in the day, time passes slowly and fades away. There are faint echoes here of Blake's Sick Rose, which symbolises human corruption, and of Shakespeare's pastoral tour de force, Sonnet 18, which famously begins, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" Just as Shakespeare suggests that the idealised beauty portrayed in his poem will fade in time, when rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, so Dylan suggests that the dreamlike illusion of ideal love in slow motion will also disappear, just as the freshly picked rose will soon wither and die. The beautifully enigmatic sign on the window is perhaps the most fully realised expression of the dilemma Dylan found himself at the end of the 1960s. It conveys a mixture of sadness, elation and philosophical resignation, which is virtually unique in popular song. It's also dominated by Dylan's distinctive piano, which sometimes carries the track alone, with a few interjections of bass and drums and some restrained backing vocals from the female singers. Midway through the song, Al Kooper's organ is featured in a duet with the piano, rather like Richard Manuel and Garth Hudson in the band. The song's a meditation on the benefits of a pastoral retreat, and it's a tentative embrace of the kind of conventional values that Dylan's work had once eschewed. As in Time Passes Slowly, the way the music rises and falls in tone mirrors the narrator's scattered thoughts. Here, the sense of uncertainty is, however, more pronounced. The verses seem somewhat disconnected, as if we're following the narrator's random thought patterns. It's not clear whether he's a participant in events or just an observer. Dylan's vocals are sweeter and more restrained than on Time Passes Slowly. Again, the song has 3 short verses and a bridge. The final line of each verse is repeated. Each verse seems self-contained. It is as if we are being given a privileged glimpse into the narrator's mind as he speculates on what his life should be like. As with the earlier song, the listener is left to fill in the gaps between apparently random statements. But the impassioned vocals and striking piano playing give the impression that the narrator himself is wrestling with issues that are quietly tormenting him, while still being lost in a dream. The first verse presents us with a series of signs which can be interpreted in many ways. Sign on the window says lonely, takes us right into Roy Orbison territory. We may expect this to be a song of self-pity, but this is followed by the rather harsh sign on the door says no company allowed. Now we get the impression that the narrator's isolation is quite deliberate. Then there is a hint of a personal drama. Sign on the street says you don't own me, suggesting that the isolation is a reaction to an over-possessive lover. Finally, Sign on the street says three's a crowd may suggest that the protagonist has been involved in some kind of stressful ménage à trois. Perhaps he has a partner behind that imposing door. Or perhaps, as the next verse infers, his lover has left with a different partner. Here and in succeeding verses, the repeated last line appears to represent the narrator attempting to reassure himself that he really believes in his own protestations. There's more repetition in the second verse, with the use of the rather awkward phrase, her and her boyfriend, who at first have departed for California and then have changed their tune. This faltering, ungrammatical line hints at a bitterness in the narrator. It could be that he feels cheated or betrayed, but is trying hard to put a brave face on everything. The details of what has happened will never be revealed, as the verse spirals into the extraordinary. Now the narrator, who is clearly emotionally distraught, appears to be confiding in us. My best friend said, "Now didn't I warn you?" Is followed by an impassioned delivery of the rather wonderfully ambiguous repeated line, "Bride and girls are like the moon." Well, what does that mean? It sounds pretty amazing actually. I've always loved that line. Although, what does it mean? Well, it could mean that such girls wax and wane in their emotions, like the moon, so that they're distinctly unreliable, like maybe the lover who's possibly left him. Or it might indicate that such females are lights in the darkness of his life. Brighton could refer to the sizable resort on England's south coast, or actually more likely a small city in Michigan which, like Dylan's hometown of Hibbing, is near the Great Lakes. The bridge section is another impressionistic sketch, taking us into what we may presume is the present moment. The narrator doesn't make the events being depicted in the song any clearer, merely making observations on the weather. Looks like nothing but rain. Sure going to be wet tonight on Main Street. Hope that it don't sleet. He appears to be abandoning himself to the vicissitudes of the elements, conjuring up a picture of a man standing in the middle of the street, allowing the hard rain to soak him thoroughly. The reference to Main Street appears to indicate that we're in a small American town, probably somewhere in the Midwest. Dylan's voice sounds a little strained here, conveying the insecurity and uncertainty that haunts his narrator. The final verse is one of the most emotive and challenging in Dylan's entire oeuvre, despite being constructed in simple language. So far he's presented a picture of a narrator who's beset by turbulent dreams and who may have been abandoned by a lover. Now, standing in the rain in this one-horse town, he dreams of the ultimate escape. Build me a cabin in Utah, marry me a wife, catch rainbow trout. This is very much in tune with the pastoral flavour of the other songs, but the final lines are nothing less than heartbreaking, as he expresses his desire for a normal life. Have a bunch of kids who call me Pa, that must be what it's all about. Again, the final line is repeated. The ambiguity becomes even richer. Can we really believe that such a simple life is all that Bob Dylan desires? He's living in retreat from the rat race of commercial music making, staying away from the drugs and the groupies and the all-night parties, writing apparently simple, straightforward songs in celebration of his new life. At the time he really did have a bunch of kids who called him Pa, but the final repeated lines are almost posed as questions. He may be happy in his rural retreat, but is this really what it's all about? Neither Time Passes Slowly nor Sign on the Window have ever been performed live by Dylan. They're both very much products of a particular time and place in his musical history. The earlier recordings of the songs experiment with musical form, with guitar-based versions eventually being replaced by takes that are dominated by Dylan's piano, which can be said to be the album's alternative voice. Dylan had played a little bit of piano on Another Side and on some of his other albums, but here it's pretty prominent really. Al Kooper's string arrangement of Sign on the Window is quite evocative in conveying the pathos in the song, which can be found on the bootleg series, another self-portrait. Judy Collins's version of Time Passes Slowly, which is enhanced by a tasteful string arrangement, communicates the piece's dreamlike quality successfully, with her ethereal vocals conveying the twinges of melancholy in the song effectively. Melanie Safka does not have Collins' purative expression, but her more nuanced vocal style, which always hints at an ironic reading of what she is singing, is actually a perfect fit with Sign on the Window's mixture of conflicting feelings. And Melanie's a singer who's kind of been a little bit forgotten, which is very unfair because she really is a fantastic singer and a very good Dylan interpreter. She's a wonderful version of Mr. Tambourine Man, and these versions are very, very original and personal, I think, so do try and check that out. When to See the Gypsy is another highly ambiguous song whose narrator gives us a certain amount of information and lets us imagine the rest of the action. Like Time Passes Slowly and Sign on the Window, it's an impressionistic piece with a dreamlike tone, which again follows the typical pop format of 3 verses and a bridge. The album version is dominated by Dylan's piano, with Al Kooper providing washes of organ. Several earlier takes appear on Another Self-Portrait and 1970. On the New Morning outtake, he takes the vocal slowly and sonorously. The demo version contains slightly different lyrics. Rather than being led by the piano, it features two dueling acoustic guitars played by Dylan and David Bromberg, and ends with a haunting guitar solo by Bromberg. The song's long been recognised as an account of a real, or most probably imagined, meeting between Dylan and Elvis Presley. Dylan once stated in an interview that he'd never met the King, preferring to remember him as the magically iconic performer of the late 1950s who had inspired him to take up music, rather than the neutered figure who had spent most of the 1960s appearing in increasingly shoddy and forgettable Hollywood movies. Perhaps he'd had a chat with the Beatles, who actually met Elvis on one of their tours and were incredibly disappointed. The personification of Elvis as a gypsy is interesting if ambiguous. There had at one time been rumours that he did indeed, this is Elvis, not Dylan, he did indeed have Romany blood, although these are highly unsubstantiated. It's more likely that Dylan identified some kind of untamed gypsy spirit in Presley's wildly sensual performances. During the New Morning sessions, Dylan recorded covers of two Elvis songs, Can't Help Falling in Love and A Fool Such as I. I mentioned that one of those earlier, both of which appeared on the Blackmail album we mentioned earlier, the Dylan album 1973. The song gives very few details of the supposed encounter. In the first verse, Dylan sings, "Went to see the gypsy, staying in a big hotel. He smiled when he saw me coming, and he said, 'Well, well, well.'" We aren't told where the hotel is, but a clue given later in the song strongly suggests that it is in Las Vegas, where Presley was currently booked for his residency at the International Hotel. Presley was also known to add "well" to the beginning of many of his songs, including That's All Right Mama, Lordy Miss Claudie and All Shook Up. This distinctive trick allowed him to take a preliminary breath before launching into his mesmeric rhythmic vocals. But if we think we're about to witness some kind of revelatory conversation between the narrator and the gypsy, we'll be sorely disappointed. In fact, conversation is made difficult by the fact that the room was dark and crowded, the lights were low and dim. Elvis regularly entertained large groups of people after his shows in his extensive suite at the top of the hotel. So the two figures are not alone, but they seem to have little to say to each other. "How are you?" he said to me. I said it back to him. It seems that both Elvis and Dylan are too embarrassed or overwhelmed to speak, especially as they're surrounded by Presley's acolytes. The dim lighting sets the scene cinematically for this very limited exchange, symbolising the lack of rapport between the two musicians. When the two stars meet, they have nothing to say to each other. The song can thus be taken as both a meditation on the hollowness of fame and an explanation of Dylan's current low profile. Having built us up for the encounter, we then take an unexpected sideways turn. The narrator leaves the party to go down to the lobby to make a small call out. This again suggests that he may be rather bored or unimpressed by events upstairs and has made an excuse to exit the scene. Making a small call out seemed hardly appropriate when engaged in a meeting with the world's most famous singer. The narrator then encounters a pretty dancing girl who presumably is employed as eye candy in one of the Vegas hotels, who implores him to return to the party immediately. "Go on back to see the gypsy," she shouts. "He can move you from the rear, drive you from your fear, bring you through the mirror. He did it in Las Vegas and he can do it here." And here's one of Dylan's famous mirror rhymes, mirror and fear in this case. It's how you pronounce it that makes it worse. That makes it work. His description of the gypsy is an eloquent description of the transformative effect Elvis could have on people, bringing them through the mirror as Dylan puts it, so they could see themselves in a different way. The narrator experiences a movingly reflective moment in the song's bridge. "Outside the lights were shining on a river of tears. I watched them from the distance with the music in my ears." He's found the meeting to be a very disappointing experience. After all the anticipation, the encounter has left him tearful and hoping to make a quick exit. Finally, he follows the girl's advice. He returns to find that the gypsy had gone. Also, That pretty dancing girl, she could not be found. We do not know how long he had spent in the lobby of the hotel, but we may imagine that making a small call out and talking to the girl must have only taken a few minutes. Dylan sets up a mystery here, but provides us with no direct answers. The song then concludes in a highly unexpected way, as he sings, "So I watched the sun come rising from that little Minnesota town." Maybe the narrator has been dreaming the entire scenario. In fact, the whole song may depict a teenage Dylan, who indeed grew up in a little Minnesota town, imagining a meeting with his hero in which he is too embarrassed or starstruck to speak. And that's the end of part one of New Morning, a Pastoral Dream, and in the next episode we'll be looking at the rest of the album. I do hope you've enjoyed this. Don't forget to follow and subscribe and all the things you do, and speak to you soon. Bye.
Is it rolling, Bob?